Bonsoir à toutes,
Good
bonsoir à
evening,
tous et
everybody,
bienvenue à ce dernier
welcome
numéro
to the
d'Opinion,
final edition
notre
of
magazine sur
Opinions,
les opinions
our
des journalistes sur cette sélection
rendezvous with
du
international
68e
journalists
Festival
here
de
at the
Cannes. Et
68th
pour la
Cannes
dernière
Film
émission,
Festival. And
j'ai
for
la
our
Dream
final
Team.
program, I
Peter
have my
Debruge
dream
de
team,
Variety et
Peter de
Virginie
Bruges from
Appiou du
Variety
Arte
and
Journal.
Virginie Appiou
On
from
va vous demander
Arte.
dans un instant
In a
de
couple of
faire un
moments,
petit
I'm
bilan
going to
de
ask
ce
you
qu'a
to
été ce
sum
festival
up
de
the
Cannes et sa
festival
sélection.
for you.
Mais d'abord, on va parler
But
du
first
film
of
du
all,
jour,
let's talk about the
MACBETH, le
film of the
dernier
day,
film
MACBETH,
en
the final
compétition
film
au
in
festival
competition
cette année.
this
Marion
year,
Cotillard,
starring
Michael
Marion
Fassbender
Cotillard,
dans
Michael
l'adaptation de
Fassbender
la pièce de
in
Shakespeare, une
Shakespeare's
adaptation
play
assez inattendue.
directed
Regardez un
by
petit peu la bande-annonce
Justin
du film.
Kurzel.
Voilà donc, ce n'est pas du tout
There
le
we
Macbeth
have
habituel,
Macbeth,
c'est pas
not
du
the
tout ce qu'on peut
usual take
attendre
on
de
Macbeth,
Shakespeare à
not what
l'écran.
you would expect
Peter, vous
from
avez pensé quoi du
Shakespeare
film
on
de
the screen.
Justin
What did you
Kurzel?
think?
I think, as you can see in that clip, there's a real deficit of Shakespeare in this version of Macbeth. You really have to know the play going in, and you have to sort of like carry with you all of the emotions that go with this tragedy to actually recognize that it is a tragedy, because it's really been stripped down to just a few of the key soliloquies in the film. Soliloquies that they've almost sort of cheated in the way that like musicals recently have kind of started apologizing for having songs. They come up with, like Chicago, they come up with these ways to invent why. And so these speeches, these amazing, is this a dagger I see before me, and damn spot, become these conversations to imaginary objects or to phantoms and the story itself really requires, I think, that you know the backstory. Visually, the movie is incredible. I mean, that, and I think, that is almost a tradition of painting that we know, that, historical subjects are kind of reinvented time and time again by artists, and they expect that the viewer sort of comes to the work knowing that. And I don't know if that's entirely fair these days. I don't know if, an American audience, say, can be, especially the kind of younger, audience that is expected to turn up for these movies in theaters, if they really, this is being sold almost like Frank Miller's Macbeth, not, William Shakespeare's Macbeth, I think.
C'est tellement ça, c'est tellement dans l'esprit quelque chose,
Exactly,
une
that's
volonté en tout cas de
right.
moderniser
It's trying to
Shakespeare et de
modernize
l'amener à ce
Shakespeare and to
public-là.
bring it to a new audience.
C'est pas la version Reader's Digest quand même, il y a quand même
It's
autre
not
chose.
a Reader's
On va quand même un peu plus
Digest
loin.
version. We're going a bit further
Est-ce que
than
vous
that.
pensez que,
Do you
vous
think?
l'avez dit, Shakespeare est plus ou moins là
You
dans
said
l'histoire,
that
mais est-ce que vous
Shakespeare's
pensez que la
not
performance
really
des
all there.
acteurs
Do you
eux-mêmes
think that the performance by
permet
the
justement à ce
actors
niveau
means
shakespearien entre
that
guillemets
we
de remonter à la surface?
allow
It's
Shakespeare
a
to
really
bubble to
interesting
the
choice that they seem
surface?
to be making in terms of the acting, in that it's Shakespeare, of course, was writing at a time before Freud, before pop psychology, all these kind of things. And what you're getting is actors who are interpreting it in a very modern, kind of psychological way. Like Fassbender is playing this like we now understand, post-traumatic stress disorder and people who've, gone to wars, and he's playing it with all that kind of angst in the role, which is, not something that you would have gotten where the poetry, the words would have been expected to convey all of those feelings before. And in a way, it's kind of a contradiction. Maybe one of the reasons you take out the words is to make room for this new interpretation.
Virginie, je vais vous demander à vous votre opinion sur la performance de
Virginie,
Marion Cotillard.
how do you think Marion Cotillard performed in this
Comment vous
film?
la trouvez en Lady
How do
Macbeth?
you Are you believable? Do you find her believable? Her role is a key role, of course. She delivers her lines perfectly. There are lots of Shakespearean lines which have been said by her and different monologues by other people as well. She has chosen to play it in a very sober manner. She's very beautiful, so it's a very interesting way of playing out the role. The film is a bit of a hybrid, as we've already said. And we've talked about video games overtaking the cinema. Here, in this particular case, something transpires, something which is really interesting, that the video game can be very cinematographic and not simply a series of shots, but something more important. So the film director made a good choice with Shakespeare. It's a very cruel story. The interesting thing for me was the hybrid notion, and cinema will go further and further towards this, whether we're talking about TV stories, narration on video games. So that for me is the visual side, which is interesting. And the director, I think, is going to make, yes, Assassin's Creed with the same directors.
Maybe, I'm not sure if I always have a little bit of trouble with the video game comparison, because to me, video games both are an immersive sort of art form where the person who's playing is kind of interacting. And if you're not the person playing, it's incredibly boring to sit and watch someone else do things. But I get that there's sort of a look here that is being, that's showing up in, say, the Assassin's Creed games. And it's also, you know, in Game of Thrones, and there's a lot of Braveheart DNA in this movie. I mean, he's definitely absorbing a lot of other kind of influences, which is, I mean, he's redoing it in an interesting way, but compared to some of the other directors in the competition who are just really going their own way, this movie reminds me of the Hou Xiaoshen film, for instance. Both of them I found very difficult to follow, very visually exciting. I mean, that's the level, the surface level on which you're appreciating it. But Hou Xiaoshen is inventing things. I mean, he's throwing out any rules or tradition and just going his own way. And this is more like, you know, it's not so much putting it in a blender, but it's definitely kind of like pastiche and taking things and stealing, and it's, you know, that sort of, it's a mosaic made out of other people's pieces.
Bah c'est parfait, ça va nous permettre de passer à...
Indeed, well, that's a good link. I think you like the Hou Xiaoshen film. Yes, it's one of the best films in the competition for many reasons. This is one of the films which struck me most with the Shoshanke and the Moretti films. But this Hou Xiaoshen film is wonderful, it's historical, it's almost a samurai film, but not quite, because he really pushes to one side all of the fights intentionally, because the director said that if he wanted to talk about, make a historical film, then he needs to include a vision of today's world also, and have a unique form. Hou Xiaoshen said that he had chosen the story, he wanted to place it in the past because it gave him enough perspective to talk about the individual and human beings, to show that in today's materialistic world we have to come back to the heart and to feelings. And that is exactly what Shoshanke is saying. He made a film about feelings compared to materialism. Interested that you're talking about the Jiazhanke film, because the influence of Asiatic film is very strong here. An interesting thing also is that, whether you like it or not, these are two of the most radical films in the festival. Do you think that's just happen chance that it comes from Asia? This year, Asia has been very, very powerful. Even in Un Certain Regard, there are 2 or 3 films which are really strong. The Koreeda is very strong as well. I don't know if aesthetically, I don't know if Asiatic aesthetics are stronger than other aesthetics. It's a question of time. They were just ready now. These are filmmakers, Hou Xiaoshen and Zhangke also. They can put onto the screen what their eyes see.
Le précédent était plutôt
the Zhezhanke's previous film was a rather cruel film, Touch of Sin, showing that living in China was not an easy task and that it wasn't to be envied. He's showing now China of the present, showing what the new Chinese people are going to become if we continue along the same road, i.e. a being with no vision of his or her own civilization, won't know who they are anymore, and are completely detached, and who knows where they'll end up. Nobody will be left, and it involves everybody, not only China, but all of us. I can't answer the questions why these films are coming from China or from America, but materialism is a big issue for them in China. Yes, in America, Peter, the American films, the Todd Haynes, the Gus Van Sant, and the Denis Villeneuve, because it's North American, he's Canadian. Do you find it a coherent choice?
I think this is sort of a disappointing year for American directors, but it is interesting to see so much sort of American talent participating in international films and doing really well. Like, I think a movie like, it's not necessarily all American, I don't even know how many of them are, but like a movie like The Lobster, I mean, it's very much sort of a Hollywood cast in a movie by a Greek director, and that combination is really exciting to see. But I think a movie like Gus Van Sant's is a real disappointment. Carol is a very strong and like, you know, very confident, formal film, but it somehow didn't touch me in quite the way that I think I probably had the highest expectations for that movie coming in. And so I've really found myself responding to films of other nationalities. In fact, the May Wen movie, which I'm really kind of in, I think, a strange camp on this movie, it just devastated me. And it stylistically, it answers a lot of problems that have been surfacing in American independent cinema right now with mumblecore and this kind of like movies that are using a lot of improvisation and stories that are very personal to the directors. It comes from their world, and whether audiences and critics are patient enough to have these kind of boring white people problem movies, these kind of things. You know, it's like, I thought May Wen did that in a way that was so true and so sincere and so cinematic and so full of like these just kind of really powerful insights, heartbreaking. I mean, I can't remember the last time I cried as much as I have in that movie. Yes, I cried in the May Wen movie, and it wasn't even that she was like trying to make that happen. There comes a point about midway where it's about this couple who's very passionately in love at the beginning, and it's a destructive relationship, and we know that from the beginning, that because she's recovering from this probable suicide attempt. And there was the moment where I'm just seeing it turn, and I'm realizing like, oh, this is, they had it all, and from here it's all downhill. And it was just like, it just broke my heart. You know, it's like, I mean, my hat's off to her. That was a real surprise, you know.
Je vais vous poser la même question que j'ai posée
à
Peter sur le cinéma américain,
Virginie, about American films, but I'm going to ask you the question about French films. The Mai Wen, of course. There were 5 French films in competition. Were they coherent? Or was this a sample of the diversity of French films?
Je sais pas. En tout cas,
I don't know if it was coherent. For me, it was interesting when you take those 5 French films in competition. It's a high number. Yes, it is a high number, but they all show that French filmmakers are interested in everything. Of course, it's an intimate film, the Mai Wen film. A lot of temperament. There's a social focus for people who are soft, The Measure of a Man. There's another film which is very evocative about the past and dreamlike qualities, the Donzelli film, which takes that risk, tries all kinds of things, and comes up with some interesting results. So that is a tradition here in France, and our vision of the world. And the Niclou film, which is metaphysical and quite uplifting, and it's his own style. And the final, of course, when I'm talking about 5, I can never think what the last one is.
It's Audiard, is the...
Oh yes, the Audiard film.
va prendre un thème social qui
He
est
takes a social theme about immigration, but then talks about quite a different immigration than the one you might think about. It's not the Mediterranean that the film is focusing on. So he goes elsewhere and he wants to make a film a bit like a Vigilante, Charles Bronson style films, which is not a bad idea at all, to bring entertainment whilst giving a message. So the French proposal here is very firm, and French films are bringing things to the table, believing in them, and delivering very, very varied temperaments. And let's add the films which were not in competition. There's the Little Prince, there's the Guédiguian film, there's the Noé film, so it's all been very open on a host of subjects. We don't have a lot of time left. Is there one film you'd like to talk about that you haven't mentioned yet?
The discovery remains the Hungarian film, Son of Saul, a first-time film. We've already spoken about it, so I won't repeat too much, but I will put in a plug for just a few French. This is, to me, like based on this selection across the sidebars and everything, a very strong year for French cinema. And I love Louis Garrel's debut, which is in Critics Week, kind of tucked away there. I thought Thomas Bidigan's film, it's a little difficult. It's not very commercial, but there's something really interesting. It's kind of an update on The Searchers. And of course, the Desplechin movie that opened the Quinzaine is a very, very strong film as well.
Très très vite, Virginie.
Oui, moi c'est
Nanni Moretti
absolument
for me, that film is magical, really light.
En une seule scène de transmission, une grand-mère apprend le latin à sa petite fille.
The grandmother communicates with the granddaughter. It's really simple. A daughter learning how to do the scooter. Thank you, Peter and Virginie. We're delighted to meet you here before our happy hour, and we're glad to have heard your opinions on the 68th Cannes Film Festival.
Opinions, c'est terminé pour cette année, mais
restez avec nous.
this year,
But stay with us. Happy Hour will start in a short while, and there are red carpets later on during the happy hour. So stay with us. Thank you very much for coming in.